Hi everybody. So today I'm here with Shiny, and we're going to teach you guys a little bit about server desync, lag things in general in video, what desync is, how the video server works, lag compensation, and we'll briefly touch on netcode. Anything I'm missing, Shiny?
What?
Did I miss anything?
Sorry, I was dreaming.
Okay, good enough. So on to the first part. We're going to be talking about what lag compensation is. Alright guys, so the first thing we're going to touch upon is lag compensation and what it is. Don't judge my painting. So lag compensation basically is the server trying to compensate for latency between your connection to the server as well as another player's connection. And there are very many common misconceptions regarding lag compensation, and one of the biggest ones is that lag compensation favors one person or the other, and that's not necessarily the case. Generally, it'll be a outcome that neither favors nor puts you at a disadvantage, but there are instances, very specific instances, where it does favor one or the other, and Shiny can touch upon that.
A TED RCE got posted. But anyways, so let's see. I guess the first thing I want to say is that if you have a good connection and someone has a bad connection, if you both in real time use the same ability, like at the exact same time in real time, then yours will be registered before theirs will, simply because yours got to the server first and was registered first. So that is one example of when someone with a good connection would be favored. Let's see when someone with a bad connection will be favored. There's some more complicated examples that can go over later, dealing with like the more specifics that we may not even know depending on how their netcode works. But one kind of universal example is if you are running behind something and then suddenly you get grabbed or you get CC'd by a ranged ability after you are completely sure you got behind it, because the person with the worst connection sees you as significantly behind where you actually were, just because the server is mashing the two sort of realities together. They're able to hit you even though on your screen and possibly even to the server you got behind the thingy. They saw you as not behind it yet, and because they still CC'd you when you were on their screen not behind it, the server is going to accept that.
And so that's basically how lag compensation inherently works, right? So essentially it's you see your perspective, as you see from over here, in one specific way. The other player sees their perspective in a certain way, and the server attempts to generate an augmented case in terms of what's actually happening in the game by trying to connect the two perspectives. So there are cases where it favors you, there are cases where it does not, but that's just basically lag compensation working as intended.
Oh, and one more thing I forgot is that and I probably should have said this before. I forget if you said it. I might have been dreaming, but the number one misconception is that lag compensation assigns artificial latency almost to someone with a good connection to make it equal to them, or to equal to someone with a bad connection. That's what it does not do.
Yeah, I kind of touched upon that. It was just more of like it doesn't favor one person or another significantly, or it doesn't make it worse for anybody. Okay, so that's the end of this section. The next section, this section we're going to be talking about is desync, a very commonly heard term. We're going to break that down, talk about what desync means and how desync works.
Hello. Okay, so now about desync. Desync is, well, desync and lag compensation go hand in hand, and desync is very often a result of lag compensation. The most common, probably that people hear example of desync is you are sure that you are multiple like body lengths away from someone, and then you desync back into their grab. And the reason this occurs is because lag compensation will allow them, if they see you as right next to them, to grab you. And even though you saw yourself as far away and the server saw you somewhere in the middle, it still allows the CC to take place. But the same would also be true for if you hit them. And this isn't perfect all the time. Latency changes from second to second, and this can also make it somewhat difficult for the server to merge the two realities. Let's see. I forget what else I was thinking about, so Bluewinters can say the next thing.
So it's important to keep in mind, guys, that when we're talking about the realm of desync, that it goes hand in hand with what Shiny said of, like, you know, if you are multiple lengths away and you're sure you're not near them, you get CC'd by something you shouldn't have, or on the opposite side of that coin, where you cast the CC and you are sure you are within the range to hit somebody, or, you know, the CC should have gone off and nothing happens, or they just walk out of your grab. This is also occasionally, not always, but occasionally a result of desync. And it's remember to keep a very open mind, guys, regarding desync, because this word is thrown around a lot, especially in BDO, in 1v1 situations more than anything. Desync goes both ways because it is hand in hand with lag compensation. It's just you and the server and the other party, the other person that you're fighting, and the server are out of sync. The dictionary definition of desync is being out of sync. So essentially, that's the most basic understanding you can have of desync. Is it's rare that one person is desyncing, and desync affects both people more often than not, right? It's very, very rare that it's just one person getting advantage from desync.
Oh, yeah. And the other thing to say about that is if both people had almost zero latency, then you wouldn't have as many of the crazy desync problems. And if both people had very high latency, they would be even worse. But with that being said, I guess you can, if you have a good connection, try to blame it on someone else who has a bad connection. But the fact that they have a bad connection doesn't mean that they are being favored by the way that lag compensation works. It is less ideal, but the bad connection is rarely their fault.
Yeah.
So that's why that doesn't make sense.
And desync and lag compensation does not bottleneck you if you have a good connection. Just because you have an amazing connection to the server does not mean you do not desync. That's the biggest point I want to get.
Even desync in a LAN setting.
Yeah. It's always going to happen, guys, with a connection to a server and a server response outward. So I think that sums up desync, right?
I think so. I'm waiting for my...
All right,
hello.
Guys, so for the next section, we're going to be talking about netcode and tick rate. So this is more to do with inherently how the server functions and how it registers things. So to start off, Shiny's going to talk about netcode, and then I'll talk about tick rate after.
Oh, okay. Hello. Okay, so netcode is, how to put it? It's kind of the blanket statement or blanket term or whatever for anything that relates to networking stuffs in games. And of course, this is naturally related to desync and lag compensation because how they handle all that is part of the netcode. There are many other things about it that probably aren't worth getting into. Wait, do I talk about tick rate or do you talk about tick rate?
I can talk about tick rate.
Oh, you get the more fun
really
one. Okay, have fun.
Okay, so essentially tick rate is, on a server, what it is how...
The server is FPS.
Yeah, it's essentially how many actions on the server, or how many actions are being registered and rechecked on the server. So for example, in games like Counter-Strike, where you see the server tick rate is 64 or 128, what it means is the server is checking for a new action, how like 100 or 64 ticks per session, and or 128 ticks per whatever. So essentially, tick rate is, as Shiny says, the server's FPS. This is a very quick category. We don't want to go too far in depth because we don't think it's as relevant, right? In terms of like just deep explaining, just kind of gloss over these two things.
Oh yeah.
Huh?
Oh yeah. I say the oh yeah. So the other thing that this made me think about is the reason that they don't just have well, I guess you're limited first both by the tick rate and by like the client report rate or whatever it's usually called, which is how many times that the client or you is able to receive information from the server. And this can also contribute to desync and whatnot. And the reason that they don't just have a super high server tick rate to improve performance is the server often isn't capable of it, since the tick rate that you can set the server at is limited by how fast it's able to update the game simulation. So a lot of people say, oh, why don't they just have the highest tick rate possible? It's the same reason that your computer doesn't have the highest frame rate possible. The hardware is not capable of it.
Yeah, and you guys have to remember that because the reason these server limitations exist is because you have to remember you're not the only person connected to the server, and there are thousands and thousands of people that the server has to respond to at any given time, especially on a scale of an MMO RPG like BDO that's massive compared to like a small 5v5 server like CS. So that's the differential that exists there in terms of how server capability kind of bottlenecks the possibility of, you know, having like a 1 million tick rate server, because it's just, in terms of hardware, it's just not possible.
When they upgrade their hamster to the mighty guinea pig, they can increase the server's tick rate.
Maybe. All right.
Hello. Okay, so for this one, the first thing... What's the first thing I wanted to talk about? Okay, so the first thing, and probably the most important thing I want to talk about, and I hear people say all the time, well, I have 150 megabits per second, I can't lag. So your internet reliability, your connection reliability is a lot more important than the speed. If it's like a fire hose with a bunch of leaks in it, that's not as good as a garden hose with no leaks. Because an unreliable connection means that you drop a lot of packets, and that is one of the major causes of desync. It can even disconnect you if it's bad enough. So even if you have a very fast internet connection, that doesn't mean you won't lag. And even if it's reliable in most cases, if the route from you to the server is poor, and that is even out a lot of times of your ISP's control, then you may not have a very good connection. So there are just so many different factors here. And I forgot what I was going to say, but you get what I mean.
Yeah, so very important, guys. Like, just because you have a fast download speed does not mean you're immune to desync. No matter what the quality of your internet is, you will always have desync. Even if you're directly plugged into the server, you will have desync. It's just not possible for there to be an instance where you will never ever experience desync. And it's very important to understand also with personal internet connections that one, and lowercase b, PS, does not equal megabytes. All right, that's just something that we need to get out there, because we've heard one too many times people say, I have this many megabytes per second. It's bits. Not that it matters. It's just something that bugs us. Also, just because you have a low ping, like I said, does not mean you are immune to desync. You are not ever immune to desync.
Think of it as your ping plus the other person's ping is the total amount of desync that you're going to experience.
Exactly. There's more than one factor here. It's not just you.
Which is why it works a lot better on KR in Japan than it does in NA.
Yeah, because the geography is a lot more condensed, and because the geography is a lot more condensed, the amount of distance a line has to travel is a lot lower, thus resulting in less desync in general. A good solution to the desync issue on North America would be if
we all live in the same house.
Yeah, or something more realistic is them centralizing their servers to like Chicago, for example, a data center with better routing throughout all of North America. So even if you experience better ping, let's say if you currently live in California, if you experience worse ping because they moved the servers to Chicago, you'll end up feeling lag less in 1v1 situations or just with desync in general, because you'll have a better connection to the user that you're fighting as well. So,
which is the other reason that you really can't blame the other person's connection, because, well, it's not really their fault that they don't happen to live close to the server.
yeah.
And again, it's out of their control, because sometimes it could, it's kind of like driving. There could be a lot of traffic on a road that's not even in the same state as you.
Yeah. So basically, guys, from this section, if you get anything, it's to reinforce our biggest point in this whole video. Desync affects more than one person.
I thought you were going to say little b doesn't mean big B.
Little b also does not equal big B. So remember this. Never forget. Alright, guys. So for this next section, we're going to be addressing a question that's been asked of Shiny and myself quite a lot recently, and that is, does FPS matter? And not in the sense, obviously, of, if you're playing with 20 FPS versus 150 FPS, obviously you're going to feel the performance difference there. What we're talking about is, does FPS matter in a sense of your machine, your computer, rendering different things at a different speed and actions to the server? So basically, if you have lower FPS, does the server respond to you slower? And yeah, so that's what we're going to dive right in about. Shiny, if you want to get started.
Hello. Okay, so I guess as simply as I can put it, it does depend somewhat on how things are handled on their end, but more or less, if you have a lower frame rate, things will be rendered slower on your end, and you can only report to the server as fast as things are happening on your end. So if you do have a lower frame rate, your animations will be slower as they're reported to the server more slowly, or the time is spaced out more when they're reported to the server. So yes, it actually does matter for this game, and for many others.
Yeah, so we took a look at a lot of comparisons in order to figure this out. For example, looking at like different games such as Grand Theft Auto, and even looking back in other MMOs, like wow. The reason why some of you think we get questions of comparison a lot with World of Warcraft, and they're like they're most commonly, oh, but World of Warcraft doesn't have these issues, and that's because of inherently how the game is built compared to BDO. BDO is a lot more fast-paced. The combat is always live, fluid, and open. Versus in WoW, with a tab targeting system and a 1-second global cooldown, it allows the server to kind of catch up to mitigate any sort of those FPS or rendering issues. So unless you're crashing or you're getting like literally 1 to 2 FPS, the global timers plus tab targeting PvP system in WoW mitigates that and kind of makes it significantly less noticeable, versus BDO, where it's always, you're always going, and you're in an open world and constantly fighting. And it's fast paced, it doesn't slow down, and there's no global cooldown. So that's why the differential between those games is there. So to answer the question, FPS doesn't matter in terms of performance towards the server. Yes, it does. Anything to add?
Nope.
All right. Okay, so guys, in conclusion, desync happens to all of us. It's not just you, it's not just me. Don't be so angry at people about desync. Lag happens to all of us. And other than that, me and Shiny would both like to thank you guys for watching the video. Anything after this point, yeah, if anything past this point will be the TLDR section for those of you who are too lazy or don't have the time to watch in-depth explanations about everything. We're just going to be covering the topics of this video a lot more briefly and just put it as a quick summary. Okay, everyone, we're at the point of the video now that we're doing the TLDR for you guys. Whether you did not have enough time or just didn't want to know about all the details, we're going to shortly sum up everything that we went over in the video, beginning with lag compensation, and Shiny's going to start it off.
Hello. Yeah, okay, so lag compensation is pretty much when the server takes the two alternate realities that are what you see and what your opponent sees and tries to mash things together in a way that works for both people. Even though you see yourself at position 1 and the server sees you at position 5 and your opponent sees you at position 10, and the other way around, if your opponent attacks you where he sees you, it will still register, and if you attack him where you see him, then it'll still register. There you go.
And then to move right into desync, then desync is in itself the dictionary word desynchronization, which means you and the player you're fighting and the server are out of sync, which is what causes the things like your grapples missing or people grabbing you from what seems like to be an absurd distance, or any sort of PvP interaction that you think doesn't sometimes go wrong or go well. Occasionally it'll be resist and you won't notice it, but people like to blame desync, and that's kind of what happens. It happens to both parties. It's not just you. So don't blame just one person for desyncing. And then to move on after after desync, Shiny's just gonna quickly go over netcode and tick rate. And don't forget the it doesn't add latency, Shiny. Don't forget to mention that.
Oh yeah. So first, the one more little thing to say about lag compensation is that the most common misconception is that it's artificially adding latency to someone with a good connection just to make it so someone with a bad connection can be, quote, equal to them. But that's not true. If in real time, two people, one with a good and one with a bad connection, do the exact same action, then the person with the good connections will be processed first and theirs will happen, not the person with the bad connection. But anyways, for netcode and for tick rate, netcode is pretty much just, it's like the blanket statement or whatever you want to call it for all of the networking related stuff in games for lag compensation and all of the other stuff and the protocols they use and all of it. And server tick rate is kind of like server frames per second. It's, let's say a tick rate of 64 means that it's 64 times per second that the server updates the game simulation and processes all of the stuffs given to it. Oh yeah, and then the next thing for him.
Yeah. So the next thing we want to go over is ping and your personal internet connection. So a very, very common misconception is the better your internet is, the faster you download, or the better your ping means you are not the one with the problem, or you're not the one desyncing / lagging. That is false. No matter how good your internet is, whether you download at 5 gigabytes per second or 5 gigabits per second or whatever you download at, internet speed does not matter. It does not affect whether or not you desync. It just doesn't. It's based on your routing to the server and how much latency is how much traffic is on that route, and vice versa. Both parties will experience desync whether or not you have very, very good internet. And that's just how the server route works. And remember, guys, megabits does not equal megabytes. And then the last topic that we're just going to cover real quick is how FPS and performance, if it matters, in terms of server registering your inputs. So, Shiny?
I run. So, oh yeah, also the other thing to add about the whole fast versus reliable internet is if you have fast internet, it doesn't necessarily mean it's reliable. It's like a fire hose with a lot of leaks instead of a little garden hose, but with no leaks. The little garden hose still has enough to fill up the pool. Yep. I forget what I was thinking about, but anyways. The impact of your frames per second on how the server kind of perceives what you're doing. It does vary from game to game anyways, but in this one, if it takes longer for your computer to process something, it can only relay information to the server based on how fast it's processing what's going on. So indeed, if you have a lower frame rate, it will take longer for your computer to render things. and it will send things to the server slower than someone who has a very, 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 very high frame rate.
Yep. That's basically the gist of that. And just to wrap things up regarding this subject, if you are comparing a game like this to WoW, which is something that we hear very commonly, World of Warcraft, the reason that they're not punished or as hard about things like latency based on the server/client side and those FPS renders is because of the 1 second global timer, global cooldown, as well as the slower pace of tab targeting PvP. Is not like video where it requires a significantly faster pace and constant updates. So that's why WoW feels a lot more fluid, and any game in general, with lower FPS versus BDO. And on that, to answer that question, I guess at the very beginning, to sum it up, does FPS matter in terms of server performance and how fast your actions get rendered? The answer is yes. Yes, it does. So we're at the end of the video now. Thank you everybody for watching. For those of you who watched the entire video and listened to all of our weird explanations, we thank you. And for those of you who watched the TLDR, we also thank you for watching the TLDR and informing yourselves. I'd like to give a big shout out to Bigandshiny for doing this video with me. And we hope to see you all maybe another time for another video of explaining something else. Bye bye.
Goodbye.